Hi, Peter. Please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Leonard. So everyone can hear me and see my slides, I hope. And let's have a quick chat about this, and we will get to what tacos are all about as we go through this. So this talk is one I've given a few times about the idea of how do we go about ensuring that as we automate, as we introduce new capabilities into the way that we deliver value to our customers, that we're also taking care of the organizational requirements and the environmental requirements that we need, and we're automating those into the way that we do that delivery. Now, I like to break my talks out into these ideas of a talk map that we go through, starting with an introduction, and we'll then talk a little bit about what's going on in the world, what's causing some of the changes that we see. It'll talk something about risk and the things that we do to try and control that. Then we'll get into talking about automating governance, some of the things that we can do in order to be able to automate governance into the way that we do delivery. And then we'll spend some time talking about the model, the TACO model, and how you can use that to help create some alignment in your organization. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. If anybody has any questions as they go along, feel free to drop them into the Q&A, and I'll try and answer them as we go. And let's go through this. So who am I? I'm a coach and a consultant. I work with organizations of all sizes, typically helping them with automating governance and revising their SDLC practices, but also getting involved in things like ITSM and all sorts of other spaces as well. I've been many different things in my career, from an individual contributor to running platform engineering departments to helping large banks build out their DevOps strategies and execute and introduce continuous delivery. Move forward. Okay, so to get started on this, we're in a very fast-paced world where we have customers demanding instant gratification. If they don't get what they need from what you're giving them, they'll very quickly go elsewhere. And this becomes easier and easier as we move forward. We've gone for this world where technology was all about how much money can we spend on it. It was expensive to switch suppliers. It was a very high initial investment to one where we could start to integrate things. It was easier to consume, and we'd start to build things out of these different technologies. And we're moving into one where we're starting to understand and learn more about that cheap initial setup, reducing the cost of switching, specialized services dedicated to particular functions, so that you can start to create a more complex ecosystem of suppliers, which will then help you build out your technology environment. Now, this is a very large shift, and it's organizations that are already very heavily invested obviously find this much harder to do. And shifting from those longer investment horizons to these shorter investment horizons takes some work. But there's lots of tools out there that'll help you accelerate value delivery. Leonard was talking about acronyms, and there are a lot of acronyms out there for all sorts of different tools and all sorts of different capabilities that will enable you to be able to accelerate your value delivery capabilities. Unfortunately, of course, a lot of the times the efforts fail from a lack of clarity, not the tools. It's about, as Tom Gill was explaining earlier, if you don't have very well clearly defined requirements with quantifiable outcomes, it becomes very difficult to really track what is the progress of introducing these. To make matters worse, when we bring these into large organizations, very often it's the organizational structures that get in the way of us being able to take advantage of the benefits these tools bring to the table. In fact, most digital transformation of this type tend to fail. And as we move into this very delivery world, the complexity is just increasing as we start to look at the introduction of SaaS services and cloud, and where is our security as we look at managing this. I was recently doing a security assessment of an e-commerce environment that consists of entirely a set of SaaS platforms which are all being integrated, and that point, identity becomes your critical control point. We need to be able to understand and manage identity in a very clear manner across all of the services to make sure that the right people have access to the right things, and that we're properly looking at our ecosystem of suppliers and managing that in a sensible way. And this brings us to the whole conversation about risk. So that's the introduction. That's the world that we're coming from, the complexity that we're living in, and starting to think about well, it's great that we have all of these capabilities, these tools that we can bring to help us accelerate this. We have these models and these methods from Agile, which allow us to think about things in a different way and think about incremental delivery. But we, at the same time, we need to understand and manage risk in that process. And so where to begin? Well, so some of the work that I'm talking about here started when I was engaged at a large bank to help them with their DevOps journey. It started as a 2-month journey and ended up being a couple of years as we realized that they brought me in to take a look at what they were doing and say, hey, are we doing the right things? And I sort of gave them a report back and said, no, this isn't going to get you to the outcomes that you're looking for. You haven't measured any kind of baseline. You don't have any way of seeing where you're going and where you're going to get to. And there's definitely some things we can do to improve. So we were talking about introducing change and change into a large, complex organization when we are trying to bring in these new modern delivery practices obviously takes quite a lot of time, and it's not necessarily that easy to do it. So what we need to do is we need to start building the ability to introduce change more rapidly rather than avoiding it. We need to make sure that we want change. We want to enable change. We want to make change a part of how we do things. And so that we're doing it more often, that way we become more comfortable with it. And that way we can start to learn from it. And this brings us to, of course, DevOps. And if we look at like the definition of DevOps around people, process, and tools working together to enable the rapid and continuous delivery of value to our customers, we find that most organizations spend a lot of time focusing on tools. They stand up a bunch of tools. They quite often might bring in some agile practices and stand up some of those tools, but they often forget about the processes and they just implement the same old processes on top of those tools. And even with the agile practices, nothing goes anywhere. I remember another organization where they had 14 agile teams, some of which were doing a really, really great job. It's just they'd done nothing to address the 3 months it then took for that code to eventually end up in production, going through all the different environments. And when you drew up this picture, that even though they were able to deliver incrementally, they weren't actually able to see the outcomes. They weren't able to see the results of the things that they were doing. And without looking at the entire system and looking at what are the processes that we're working with and just taking what we've always done and then applying that into the automation, you'll often run into these problems. Then we have to think about the people, because there's lots of people involved in this. And if we just focus on the tools and we focus on changing the processes because of those tools, then what happens to the people? And that's often very much the hardest part of looking at how do we introduce change into these environments. And so, which is why people have to come first. How are we going to work together as a team to look at the systems and the processes and the management of them that we have today and introduce some new ways of doing this? Which is easy, right? If it was so easy that everybody would do it, we would just hand out these buttons, we could press it, and that change to do. In fact, I worked for an organization that did that, and very quickly the batteries disappeared. So when we look at change, what change does is everybody goes through this change adoption curve. As we're introducing these new paradigms, these new ways of working, introducing new knowledge through training, all the while we've got to also meet all of the existing obligations and existing commitments that there are in the organization. So as we go through introducing these new things, we see that people will typically, first of all, want to ignore the change, say, that's not going to apply to me. That's great for all those folks over in digital who are working on that web stuff. It's fantastic. I'm just going to ignore it over here in the mainframe. We don't need to care about this. To complain, well, why are you doing this? You're going to break everything. Everything's going to fall over. To please don't do this to me. To sulking about, well, that's done it now. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be awful. To eventually finally accepting the change and hopefully the changes for the better and we're improving. So as we look at how we introduce change and how we help our organizations, we want to look at different ways in which we can bring this change adoption curve down. How can we make it easier for these organizations to be able to take these new paradigms, these new ways of working, bring them into their organizations, understand how to start to apply them in context of what they're already doing, and make sure that they can do the right things at the right time while continually and incrementally improve. So I started to help them. Some of these things were already underway. Other pieces I helped them to build out, and we go in this bank that I was working with, and we had a champions program that worked over like these 5 weeks. At the end of the 5 weeks, she got elevated access into CI tooling and a badge and award, and we built out a standardized pipeline system so you could come and very easily access a set of APIs, which would then allow you to more quickly stand up and create pipelines that would allow you to very easily deploy all the way into production. And we built out a number of capabilities like this. This picture in the bottom right here is the service desk, the ITSM piece that we built out for handling new incoming requests and managing new capabilities, new ideas. How do we build a community around the new ideas that we want to do and make sure we're helping to support and manage that? And then I'll talk as well about the perils and the balance of needing to ensure that the organizational concerns are being taken care of at the same time as enabling delivery teams to be able to build and create these things themselves. And at what point do we make a decision to go one way or the other? And how do we monitor and measure what that looks like so we know that we're doing things the right way? What we found was that after a while, that the organization was very much too large to easily change in this manner, and we were getting lots of resistance across different areas, and there were a lot of that resistance was coming from security and governance and other shared services that were saying, well, if you make these changes, if you start to automate all of these things, then remember my change graph, it's like, well, you're going to break everything. Like, please don't do this to our environment. Everything's going to be terrible. You're going to give all our data away to our customers. And I argued, looking at some of the practices, that maybe they already were. But as we look at this then, so this is the Rosetta Stone. It was used to translate hieroglyphics into ancient Greek and Latin, that I think then allowed us to be able to understand the hieroglyphics. And so that this translation, what we were finding was a lot of things were getting lost in translation between the different areas of the organization, between developers who were like trying to, who were concerned about building wrong things because they weren't getting the right requirements and weren't understanding it, but they were using their own languages. They were talking about things in their own terminology. You had testing that was also talking about things and was very much not at this point aligned into the development teams. And so we had work there to bring these two areas together, start them to talk the same language. We had operations that was operating in a highly different silo and was worried about all of the change causing more chaos for them, more work for them. We had security that was worried about what is going to go wrong when you start to make all of this change in the environment. How are you going to break everything? We had compliance worrying about, well, we have all of these other external things that we need to make sure that we satisfy. We've got the board telling us where we need to be, what it is we should be doing, and understanding that. So as we start to go through this, we start to see that we've got all of these other external groups, none of whom are talking to each other. They all use their own language, and trying to bring them together to have that common thread of understanding, it can be very, very difficult. So in terms of if it comes to people, it seems that it still comes to the people and tools are only addition to the process, right? Well, if we think of the system as a whole, all three of these have to interact for the system to work well. The system will perfectly produce what the system is designed to produce. And as we look at how we have things up, it's the interaction between these three pieces. We always like to think about things in terms of people, process, and tools. But as in a recent engagement, looking at having the tools to be able to demonstrate more rapidly what this may look like will help you design requirements, especially in a greenfield type environment. In a brownfield environment, just being able to visualize what it looks like and helping with that conversation design is critical. As Eisenhower put it, it's the planning is everything. It's we don't really care about the plan. whereas the plan is less valuable. So it's all about creating alignment. And so realizing that we had all of these different pieces of conversation going on across the organization, I had to find a way of bringing these different pieces together. So I did what I normally do in these circumstances, and this is pre-COVID, so I brought people together and sat down for coffee and started to have a conversation about like, hey, what exactly is it that you're looking for out of these delivery processes? You have your own language. Could tell me how you would describe what it is that you're seeing. What is your perspective into this? How can we provide you what you're looking for in a language that you would be able to consume and integrate into your processes and practices so we can start to bring the teams together? This is this co-creation of what the solution might look like, and bringing them together was something quite alien in the bank at that time. We of course then had to also look at how we measure. As I mentioned, there wasn't anybody looking at how do we actually measure the improvements to the practices we're introducing with respect to governance and risk. There was very much this idea that it's this really big complex beast that's sitting off to one side, or security is going to show up at the end of the project and it's going to tell us that we did everything wrong and ask us to change everything and introduce new capabilities into our systems. And that's going to be far too late, and we're going to have to redo everything, and that's going to be a big problem. So there wasn't really any concept of how might we quantify this? How might we quantify what that looks like? So we looked at bringing in some actual metrics. How do we make a baseline of where we are today? How do we look at how we're doing the system delivery from a risk and a governance perspective, and understand and quantify what is the risk of this system that we're delivering? And so going through and stating, well, we've got different levels of risk for different types of deliveries. Some systems require more oversight than others. A large change to a centralized component or system that's going to have a much larger impact should be treated with much more caution than a change to an individual component that doesn't have a large amount of integration into the rest of the systems, in which we can very easily make that change without impacting anything else, looking for where are our dependencies. Bringing together and understanding that in integration sessions, holding a session where we understand like who depends on who, what do we need to do here, and then looking from the point of view of, in order for us to move forward, we wouldn't be able to make any changes if we considered the larger legacy systems to not be in compliance. So we take them as being in compliance today. We know we already have a system that's live, that's out there, that has all of these vulnerabilities or these issues in it. What we would just want to see is, we don't want to see that increase. We want to put pieces in to show that is decreasing, that we're addressing those, but we're addressing them over time. We're not going to try and address 10,000 outstanding issues all at once. What we're going to ask for is, we're going to say, hey, we want to see some improvement. We want to reduce this over time. And we want to look for any unique or new things that are occurring and address those before they get into production. So we've talked about the introduction, we've talked about risk and sort of the conversation around what risk might look like to us and how we might want to start to address that, and some of the problems around the different parts of the organization talking different languages and not being able to come together. Now let's talk a little bit about how you go about automating this into your environments and what it is that you need to do to make that happen. So when we look at these large complex organizations, we see that one of the first problems is, do we as the delivery team even know if we have a problem that we need to address, let alone how we might want to go about addressing it? So for example, if we need to pick up the phone and call the compliance department, and we might get told by Bob, Sue, or Steve to go read the manual and dig through the 300 standards, 200 pages of policy, get to the section 3.1.4.3 and determine if that applies to your context. And you rarely get the same person. every time you call up. So you find the section, you try to work out whether it applies to the problem set you're looking at. And then you call back, and then you might not get the same person. So it's difficult to find out, what is it I'm supposed to do? How am I supposed to even understand what's necessary in order for me to make sure I'm doing the right thing, to build this in a way that I'm going to satisfy whatever risk criteria I have, rather than run into those problems later on. And that, if that's the compliance piece, we also have a security piece underlying this, which we'll talk about too. So this becomes especially hard in cloud for large organizations which are adopting this, where there's such a differential in mindset in how they move into that. And most organizations have brought this in, but not ubiquitously. And they've come up with different ways of starting to align this. But you run into other problems where the auditing team that comes in doesn't necessarily understand the differences in what you're doing. I've seen this in building in a house where you make a slight change to something that's outside the standards, but is within the standards, and the inspector who shows up has got like, I don't know what that is, so I don't know if I should pass that or not. So if we start to bring in these new capabilities with DevOps and Agile, and the organization doesn't react so well. We've also got to start to ask questions about, with this process in place, is this actually making us safer? Is this actually making us better? Are we in control of what we're delivering as a consequence of the work that we're doing? If our delivery system is managed by the team is able to push things out production, and I've got this organization that's sitting outside of that, that has a whole body of knowledge around standards and compliance that has to be abided by, and they're just coming in once in a while and taking a look and saying, I think it looks okay. And you end up with this back and forth spin. It becomes, from delivery perspective, it's team perspective. It's like, well, I got this set of hurdles I've got to pass in order to get this into production. Whereas the intent of this is, how do I build a safer system? How do I build a system that isn't going to expose customer data? How am I going to actually properly understand what it is I need to do to make sure I build the right thing? And when we start to look at this from that perspective, we can see that this adversarial role that compliance departments often play to the delivery team, it gets in the way of us looking at what the underlying purpose of all of this is, which is to build a better, more secure, safer system, protect our customer data. So this brings us to the whole safety 1 versus safety 2. Focus on what is right, not what is wrong. Safety 1 is very much about looking at, I want to monitor the defects. I want to look for all of the defects, all of the holes, all of the problems. Instead of looking at all the holes, look at what do we do well? How do we build on those strengths, and how do we make it better, so that we're actually all working towards the same set of goals? So how can we bring these two areas together and start to align them? So to do that, we start with the pipeline, because this is a very typical place to start within in DevOps. And this pipeline comes out of some references, and there's lots of references I'll provide at the end of the talk as to where some of these bits of information come from. So this is built out of some of the IT revolution pieces, and this model is talking about a pipeline with the different areas, not phases or gates, but the different areas in which we might want to look for and be able to monitor for different types of possibility. In a typical organization, a lot of the time, the security checks all occur here at the end. They say, okay, before you go in, we're going to run a pen test. We're going to have to do all of this scanning all at the end. We're going to make sure that you've done all the right things. Whereas the reality is, we really want to be introducing checks all the way along this. We want to be doing, and as Leonard said, acronyms. If we were looking at SCA at the start, source code analysis, we're going to look at SAST, static analysis. Source tool. Oh, geez. And we're going to look at DAST at the end. We're going to look at all of these different pieces. We're going to look at IAST and RASP and other wonderful acronyms. And this, again, is a part of that language problem. As security comes in and starts to work with delivery teams, they have their set of acronyms, and they have their own set of tools which differ completely from all the sets of acronyms and tools which are being used within the teams. But we know that we need to be able to find different ways of properly managing this. So when we look at a running pipe, we want to think about how do we define the work? So and this is how we might do it, and this is how we built out those initial pipelines, was define the work, make sure everything is defined as code, check that in, have a CI build automatically build out the tests, take the quality results, and initially we'd have somebody watching and looking at that. Then we build the artifact. The artifact is build once, deploy many. After step 5, we never rebuild the artifact. We only ever build it, manage dependencies at that layer, validate that that is working, so that we can then, as we do the next CI runs, which will then do any deployment, will also run any final organizational tests or validations, for example, looking at ensuring that the state of the end system is in the operational state it's supposed to be in, and then validating that it's all working correctly. We also want to be able to measure this end to end, so we can start to look at understanding and improving this. How do we take a look at this and look at how do we go from the longer, slower cycle times to shorter ones that allow us to deliver faster. We also want to then look at, well, over time, how do we build more trust in the automation so that we don't need to have manual checks at these stages? How can we move from manual peer reviews of code with the handoff to being able to do this more collaboratively and allow the systems to look after this for us? How can we move from having a manual deploy out into the production environments and overnight releases to doing automated releases into these target environments with these, especially with these large legacy systems? Then we got to look at auditing the pipe. So in our first iteration of this used Agile, which is Capital One's open source project for doing visualization of the pipelines. We ran into some problems with that, in that we didn't have sufficient development capacity to extend it as we updated the systems that Agile was integrating into, and Agile wasn't updating as fast as we were updating the systems that it was talking to. So we switched from that model to doing an elk system based off, so looking at logs, pulling those logs in and building out a Kibana dashboard that allowed us to be able to visualize over time periods, like what is the overall impact to the systems that we're helping to improve, how much have we gone, and we were able to show that we'd gone from, for the people coming into the platform, we're going from 6 months to 1 month in terms of cycle times on the deployment pipelines. We were able to, and this was over the course of that 1.5 years since we started to introduce these capabilities, we very rapidly managed to demonstrate back to the organization benefits, and then since then they've gone even further. So we were able to pull these out. One of the important piece here is to make sure you automate this. I mean, we've got lots of great sources of data that we can pull in, pulling them out through logging in, and classifying, understanding those, categorizing those into standard format to be able to build out these reports is a very critical part. That piece married with the communications and ensuring that you're communicating continually back into the organization. Look what we did. Look how wonderful this is something that helps with demonstrating and radiating that change. So this is a very critical piece. But another part that we brought into this was bringing the auditors to the table to make sure that the auditors, we were writing things out in a language that the auditors could understand, and helping so that would help them move forward. We've also got to think about this, that this is a paved road. And it's not going to be for everybody, but it is going to be for many. So what we're looking at here is we're really talking about how do we build the system that's going to help people get started and help them be able to accelerate their journey, take care of things that some of which they didn't know that they had to take care of, but other pieces which they can use to learn from. The more cutting edge teams, the ones that were already doing some of these pieces, those ones we gave more direct access into the APIs, helped enable them, helped them learn, and gave them the set standards to comply to themselves, rather than enforcing them into the frameworks that we were building. And you need to do that because you need to be able to collaborate. So if we look at our Pareto's rule, if we look at our 80-20 rules here, if for 80% of the organization, the paved road that we build is going to give them everything that they need, and we can help enable them to get on this journey and help them look at, understand how their delivery practices are working, help them understand how to integrate and align compliance into their processes and practices, then that's going to work really well there. For the other 20%, who may already have started down this journey and gone a different way. We want to help enable them, help them understand if they're doing the right things, and act in a more consultative role, so that we can also learn from them as they discover new things and bring that back into our systems. Another aspect of this that's worth considering is we might not necessarily want to go in the same direction. We might want to take a detour. We might decide that there's a really pretty windmill over there that we want to go look at. We might decide that there's something we want to visit and we want to discover and learn along the way, which means we might consciously make a decision to go along the path. We might, but we want to make sure that the system is flexible enough to build that out for them. So automating governance. That it sounds like a lot of work going through a lot of these pieces, but it's not really. It's about thinking about things like, it's not about the checklist, it's about collaboratively creating safety in the way that we do delivery. It's not about keeping audit off your back. So it's moving from that mindset of the adversarial mindset to one more about how do we collaborate to create safety in the systems that we build. Start small, get one team working and grow from there. Don't try to boil the ocean and do this across every one of the standards that you have. Make sure you're engaging leaders and focusing on the conversation, not the tooling. So if we've done an introduction, value delivery, or reasons for a lot of this, we talked about risk and DevOps and the things that can do to help with that. We've talked about automating governance and the ways that we start to build up pipelines and integrate those, and some of the pieces around that. So the next part of this is, well, how about why and how to make a taco? So one of the things that we found as we started to do this continually with lots and lots and lots of teams was we needed a way to create that common language faster. We needed a way to be able to go to them and say, love what you're doing. We've got these like pipelines already built. Would you like to come on this journey with? Would you like to be able to do things better, safer, cheaper, faster? Would you like to be able to bring these in? Would you like to be able to help to adopt these things? And so for that purpose, we went about and we created this model, which I called TACO. So the idea was that we need to, first of all, identify what happens in the pipelines in the delivery. We call that traceability. So we have a set of checks that we look for there. We're looking for a chain of custody test results for all. This gives us a set of common points that we're looking for within the delivery team's pipelines to be able to tell whether they're doing the right things. We look at securing the access into the delivery process. Are the systems that are being used within the delivery process itself secure? This is a common vulnerability that occurs. This is how SolarWinds, if you heard of that one, essentially got hacked. They got hacked through their software supply chain, through the delivery system that came in. And so putting the right access controls into there. Compliance, making sure that we've got organizational compliance lined in, peer review, scanning the code, scanning the artifacts, managing the data, and operations, making sure that what you've deployed is deployed in the right place, is running where it should be, that it is what it says it is, and check it works, and making sure that they watch it live. And then we audit it all. My daughter drew this lovely picture of this for me, which she took about 5 minutes to draw, and I was like, wow, that's kind of pretty. So I always include that. We first wrote these as a spreadsheet. We did, and so we always start simple, start small. And so we took these controls, and if you send an email at the end, I'll send you the spreadsheet, and it's got the controls in it and how we broke things down to look at the different stages of purpose, control, artifact location. And this is a way that auditors and compliance are often looking for things, and we're looking for like, hey, this is what we're going to do in our pipeline. This is the things that will satisfy. We could then measure that and visualize it. We could we ran workshops where we would start with a standardized model, and we could help to break down these processes and say, hey, okay, looking at the outcomes we want, how do we break that down into what controls we need in what places and what that might look like? So we could start to look at and identify where we want to put controls, and then start to quantify things. We then want to look at the overall pipelines, all of the complexity that we see in delivery. And so I drew out the actual system looked like this. And when I was presenting this in person, I would quickly quip that like, hey, I'm not going to let you read that. We'll do a simplified version of this. Important to remember, these are not gates. These are just phases of delivery. These are areas in which we can think of, hey, what are we doing here to introduce more safety? So if we're looking at the build, we look at things like local IDE testing, looking at having a traceability back to the ticket to understand what's happening through the build process, visibility into that, understanding what our, creating the ability to do local builds and tests to understand what's happening there, and be able to upload that into the main systems, looking at CI servers, in the validate zone, make sure we build the artifact, that we build that once, scanning our open source libraries, looking at code quality tests, static security tests, storing results, radiating those back. In the testing zone, looking at executing functionality and non-functional tests, dynamic security regression testing, performance, all of the testing happening to validate the artifacts that we move through. And then we radiate those back. Now, all of this should be happening automatically. And in order for this to happen at speed, of course, we want to make the changes as small as we possibly can. So Capital One does something similar. They have a set of 16 controls that anything that's supposed to go into production has to meet all of these to do continuous delivery. This is a very similar type of model to what I classified as TACO. Nationwide also does some really good things in this space as well. In fact, a lot of that transformation started out of the auditing space. And so if you've not seen some of those videos, I'd highly recommend watching them. This talks as well about safety teams and how you align compliance to the value streams, and which is another part of something I like to talk about a lot. And then measurement, how you radiate this back. And this is an example dashboard out of some of the Nationwide stuff. So to wrap up here, we're not really talking about just DevOps. We're talking about, or DevSecOps, or as John Smart coined, we're really talking about this risk dev, risk ops risk, this idea that we need to embed risk management all the way through our development and operations processes to be able to understand and appropriately build safety into the systems that we are building. So we got to think about how we cannot solve the problems with the same thinking we've used before. We have to look at new ways of doing this. There's lots of references here from a lot of the pieces I've been talking about in this talk. And we can quickly run through a quick review. So we've talked about creating a common understanding of what a good pipeline is, like going from talking about apples, oranges, and bananas to talking about tacos, helps everybody get on the same page as to what does it mean for us to be secure, and coming up with that. And so putting it out there as a straw man to say, hey, what do we all agree a good pipeline will look like, so that we can, as an organization, start to build our systems like that. That way we're all being more consistent about the way we build safety into our systems. Safety is about behavior, not just tools. We got to make sure we're not just considering the tooling that gets introduced here, and ways to help automate that software delivery compliance. Because once we have all of this information, it makes actually meeting the audit requirements is an output of what we're doing naturally, rather than creating unplanned work into the system for us to be able to have to go and build all of these, because we're now actually all working towards the same set of goals, because we're not just having an external body coming in and saying, well, you're not doing the right thing. Okay, so here we go in terms of that communication, and here's the piece at the end. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you sign up, there's only one required question, which is, hey, what do you think? And if you want to give me your email, then it should automatically send you the copy of the spreadsheet. And if it doesn't, then email me and I'll happily send you a copy of the TACO controls, and this deck should be uploaded as well. And that's it from this talk.
Hey, Peter, thank you very much for your talk. I'm not technical guy, so yeah, there was a lot of different diagrams. They look great, but yeah, I think more technical people understand those better things. But we have, yeah, some questions. So yeah, let's have those go through. It seems that it still comes to the people, and tools are only addition to the process. So is it right?
I always say it's all about the people and what they're doing in the system, because they're the ones who'll have the biggest impact on it. The tooling is an enabler of the system if it's done right, and sometimes it breaks the system if it isn't. I know that one of the organizations I'm working with at the moment has, I would say, one too many systems in place, in that in an effort to try and control the complexity, they've created more complexity by introducing new systems and new tools into the process, and made things even more complex than they need to be. So I'm making some recommendations back that perhaps by removing some of some of these tools, you might actually make the system better, and maybe we should try that and see what happens, and see if there is a better way to actually streamline what it is that we're doing. But then there's definitely some pieces there to understand. It is always, to me, a combination of the three. It's like how do we bring people, process, and tools together to work harmoniously towards a set of end goals? How do we create the alignment between these three components? If we focus too much on one over the other, then we always end up with problems in the system.
Aha, so it's more about balance other than people only.
Yep.
Okay.
And I think I answered the other question there around the TACO model. You can get more information there. There's also articles on our website and other places, and there's a spreadsheet that, as I say,
yeah,
will get sent.
I've seen your slide. You've gone through this very quickly, but you have suggestions on books. Yeah, you would like to read to get more understanding on this. So yeah, we will share anyway this deck with our audience, and they can get those names and things which were showed. Cool. So yeah, it seems we don't have any more questions.